So today's topic is very important no matter if you're a discovery writer or plotter. I definitely think if you find yourself being like at one hard end of that scale, that you experiment with the other side to make sure that you're not missing out on something that could really benefit you. But I myself am pretty far on the discovery end side, and I try to plot often, and I experiment with different ways to plot often because I like the idea of it and I want to be really good at it, but I really just don't think it complements my work. So usually when you refer to a discovery writer versus a plotter, or some people call them pantsers and plotters, but I just think that word's dumb. But whenever you refer to that, it's usually the system that produces that writer's best work. So as a discovery writer, I can plot and I can write, but it just doesn't feel like my best work. It doesn't feel as natural or as smooth or as dramatic. Usually people find themselves at some part like in the middle of the scale. It is very rare, I think, for somebody to be all like pantser or all discovery writer, but no matter where you are, pacing is very important. So whenever you're writing your book, you need to write the important parts of the story and the parts that really contribute to what is going on. So there shouldn't be any scenes in your whole book that serve absolutely no purpose. There should be no scenes of the character waking up and brushing their teeth and getting on the bus. If that's what they do every day, those things can be described in a matter of sentences or a small paragraph. They don't need to be written out in whole scenes. So it is really important to pace this really well while you're writing so that you don't have to cut out weird little scenes like that and really throw the pacing off in your whole novel at the end. So the process of cutting out the stuff that you don't need is usually referred to as trimming the fat. And if your book is extra fatty and you have to trim big segments of it out, then it really messes with the proportion of what happens and when. So it's really good to have an idea of what the pacing is going into it. And sometimes as a discovery writer, that can seem really daunting because you're just writing and you're writing what happens. And then in most cases, I find that I hear people saying that they really just eyeball when it's going to happen. Like they feel for when it's right. And that is really good. But I have a little bit of a better system that I wanted to share with you guys today. I use the ever so popular Save the Cat Writes a Novel book. I think if you were on YouTube, you probably heard of this. It is mentioned, I feel like, by every writer, and that's actually what got me to pick the book up. And it's written in a really easy to read way, and it tells about storytelling in a way that's not like super daunting. It describes writing a book like watching a movie. And I think that's because the original Save the Cat book was for screenplays, but it's really a game changer when it comes to storytelling, because when you think of your book as a movie playing in your head of scenes and actions, it really makes you consider some things that you might not have considered elsewise. So I use this book, or the beat sheet really that comes in this book, for my planning, and I really enjoy that method, but this will work no matter what method you use. The thing about the planning in this book that I use for pacing is the percentages. So it'll say the opening scene is the first percent, but the setup is from %1 to %10. So you have the opening image and you have the setup, and then somewhere in the middle of that you have to put the theme stated, and these percentages are what gives you the when should something happen part of your story, and that's what's important. And a lot of planning like toolkits and methods have this. So they have things that go by chapters, they have the classic 3-act story structure. If you do enough research on any of these methods, you'll find those percentages, so that's what you want to take note of. So you're going to take those percentages for every planning method that you use. And I know as a discovery writer, we don't usually do a lot of planning, but usually we do some amount of planning. And if you're not planning on doing any preparation for your book, pick a system you like. If this book was easy to read and you like the way that it talks and tells stories, use these percentages. If the way that the 3-act story structure explains it is what really makes sense and clicks with you, use those percentages. You don't need to make the outline, you just need the percentages, and you need to understand what each percentage point means. You have to know that the theme stated means like a little bit of foreshadowing for what the theme is supposed to be. And you have to know that like the setup is like the characters, they describe it, I think, as like the A world or the world one or the status quo. I think is the word they use here, is the status quo. You have to know what it is and what the function is. You don't have to have it planned out for your book. That's the important part. So the next thing you're going to need is you're going to need a word count goal. And I feel like a lot of people do this for novels. Some people don't, but when it comes to novels that people want to pursue, like for publishing, there's usually a frame of what is normal in the publishing industry. If you do get this Save the Cat book, there's actually a chart on one of the pages that describes what the like standard industry word count is for each genre, and then it gives you examples of like outliers as well, because there's always outliers. So you don't have to focus too much on what the words are, you just have to create your own word count. So if you're writing a YA fantasy and your word count is 2,000 words, great. I think most Harry Potter books, the latter half of them are that many words, so that wouldn't be like too out there of the goal, but whatever you want to do is what's important. You need the percentages and you need a word count. So my YA fantasy book is about 85,000 words, so that's the word count that I've been using for all of my like planning method things. So you sit down and you write. Normally I have a period of writing where I'm really figuring out where I want the story to go, and I don't know if that's just me. Let me know in the comments if you do something similar. I sort of like write blindly until I think, oh, like this is a good opening image, this is like where the story should start, and then I go from there. So you have your project, you get over the blank page syndrome, which I guess that's just my way of doing that, and you have your starting point. And then you do a little bit of math and you figure out for your word count what each percentage is and where it falls exactly. So for example, the catalyst is at the 10% mark of your book if you're using the beat sheet method. So using the beat sheet method in this, the catalyst has to fall around 10%. The book even says sometimes it's normal for it to be a little bit earlier because you don't want it to be boring. So 10% of my 85,000 words is 8,500 words. So I'll be writing the opening image and I'll be writing the setup. And whenever I'm getting close to 8,500 words, I know I have to start preparing for the catalyst. So I'm writing and it's interesting, and I'm writing and it's interesting, and I think, oh, in 2,000 words I have to do this, and then I do a little planning just for those 2,000 words. Like I have to do something like this and something like this, and then the catalyst can be this thing. And that's sort of how you go through the whole book. So you reach the catalyst, and then the next milestone, I think, is the debate, which is between 10 and 20%. And the 20% mark ends, if I'm not mistaken, it ends at 17,000. I'm pretty sure. I have it written in my book because I did the math, but I don't have all the numbers memorized. So I'm writing, and then I get to around 15 or 16,000, and that's when I say, okay, I have to switch gears and make sure something like this happens soon. So that gap of space that you need to plan is probably going to be different for each writer. Like if you already have an idea of where you want it to go, you might be able to get away with a shorter gap. So if you're the opposite and you have a lot of things that you want to talk about and you can't decide what's more important, then it's probably going to take you a little bit more time to figure out like what you need to be going on around that 17,000 words or 20% mark. So my reason behind doing this, and the reason that I found it's really effective for all of my writing, is because I'm constantly sort of cramming important things into smaller spaces, which can be a pro and can be a con. You really want to be conscious that you're not cutting out things that are important to your story and will develop them. These numbers are suggestions, so it's not like my debate stage where I go into Act 2 doesn't have to start immediately at 17,000 words or it's wrong. It's more of it has to fall somewhere around that time. So if it falls at 15,000 words, I don't think anyone noticed. If it falls at 18 or 19,000 words, people really aren't counting the words. They're not really going to notice. There is also the case that I know I have some fat that needs trimmed in the beginning. So I know that I have a little bit, just areas that are a little boring that might need spiced up or might need cut out entirely. So I take that into account, and maybe I'll push to make my debate section of my book start around 20,000 words just to make up for what I'm cutting out of the beginning. This isn't the only method on doing this, just like this isn't the only book. Probably every author on YouTube has their own instructions. Famous authors probably have their own instructions. I definitely recommend, when it comes to stuff like this, listening to a lot of videos on the topic. That way you can see a bunch of different people's point of view and really find something that works for you, because everybody is different and different things work for each writer. This works really well for me because it makes me consciously aware all the time of making sure all the important parts are getting pushed into scenes. And this makes my scenes more like I want to say more serious, but that sounds bad. It makes my scenes more impactful. One scene does multiple things because I know that I have to get multiple things done, and it makes my story more interesting. So this book I really like because whenever you are writing this, they have each section is like explained in a couple pages, basically. So whenever you get to that section, you can reread the pages explaining the stuff that needs to happen and why, and then you can look at your story and say, okay, in my story, this is what needs to happen and why. It really helps keep my story as interesting as it can be. It reminds me whenever I need tension. It reminds me whenever I need to introduce new characters or something dramatic happens. It reminds me when the character arc has to switch a little bit. It's just something that's really been a game changer, not really just the book, even though I really do enjoy the book, but the method of saying, okay, in this many thousand words, make this part of the character's story arc happen. I think my laptop's dying. That really helps make my book less fatty, and that's kind of the goal. The less fatty your book is, the less words you have to cut out in the editing phase. And as somebody who's not only a discovery writer, but also an overwriter, it is very important for me to cut out those meaningless scenes, and they do still pop up here and there. I am a firm believer that if you don't know what you want to happen, to just write, and eventually you'll say, oh, okay, this happens next. So there are parts of my book where I'm figuring that out, and those will need to be cut. But I would rather cut 2 or 3 paragraphs of me figuring out what needs to happen next instead of cutting a whole chapter because I was rambling because I didn't know that I was supposed to be moving on to the next thing at the point that I should have. So this is a solution for fixing the pacing as you're writing and being conscious of how fast your book is moving while you're working on it. But I think like the read factor is also very important. So even if you do all this to the T, there's a chance that your book might not be fast enough, it might not have enough tension and stakes. And as a writer, the only way to really catch this, especially if you love your story, the only way to really catch this is to share it. So in the initial writing stages, it might not be ready to share, but after draft 1 or after maybe you just touch up chapter 1 or chapter 2 to check your pacing, I would definitely recommend giving it to somebody else just to say, is this interesting? Would you read past chapter 1? Because you want to hook readers and you want them to root for your protagonist and you want them to like stress over the catalyst. You want them to be stressed out right with your protagonist, and the best way to do that and to be good at it is to get like beta reader feedback. And as far as pacing goes, your book might not be ready for overall beta reader feedback, but if you're worried that the beginning of your book might be too slow, then it's definitely a good idea to find a writing buddy, a critique partner. Sorry, my computer keeps yelling. But you should find a writing buddy or a critique partner, somebody on the NaNoWriMo website, somebody that you met on YouTube, no matter who they are. It can be your mom, your sister, your best friend. Give them just your first few chapters and ask them, is this interesting? If they say, oh yeah, it was okay, like maybe I would read it, then maybe your pacing is off in the first few chapters. But if they read it and then they look at you and they say, well, are you going to give me more chapters? Do I get to read the rest of the book? Or like if they're asking you questions about what happens, that's a good sign. So there's always that option to work with somebody as you're writing and get their feedback. I think that's very valid. I make a lot of really little typos and things that bother me about my writing that make it a little bit like nerve-wracking for me to share, but it really shouldn't be. And I think it's something you really have to get used to, and I'm gonna make myself get used to it mostly for this reason. I want people to read my first and second chapter while I'm writing the end of the book to tell me things like, do they understand the world? Does the magic system make sense? Did I explain enough? Did I explain too much? Things like that I want to know before I finish the book, because I need to know, like, is the end of the book gonna suck? So that's the method that I use, and I really find that it helps significantly doing that and then getting a little bit of feedback and going back and revisiting. But I mean, the feedback part is optional. You can always just do the pacing, do the percentages on yourself, and hoard your work like a gremlin. That's fine too, whatever you want to do. I post writing related videos every Monday. If you enjoyed this one, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notification bell next to it so that you'll be notified whenever I upload something new. I will see you next week.